This is our Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A session. I'm Dave McCormick from Alpha Software here with Dion, who's going to take you on a tour, a second part of his demo from last week, but we're here to answer questions, so please type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar interface. Here we have a couple people who also said they didn't see the interview, so that's the important thing. The other thing I want to let everyone know, as always, is that we will be making a recording of this session. You'll find it in a few days at videos.alphasoftware.com. So, all right, sorry for the rough intro, but welcome, Dion. How's it going?
Ready to go. Doing great. Doing great. First week of school, kids back in there, we're back to normal. Everybody go back to work.
I know, exactly.
It is weird. It's all of a sudden, it's like crazy. There's so many projects starting to fly. It's just, I do believe summer's over now. You know, for some people that must be disappointing, but we're all back to work.
Excellent.
Well, thank you for joining us. We know your time is extremely valuable, and we really enjoy having you spend time with us. First and foremost, this is about you. It's all about you, so make sure to give us those questions. Some of the demonstration today came from a question on a previous weekly webinar, and it really allows us to kind of understand what people out there are looking for and deliver that content to them. And so we really enjoy this, and we enjoy those questions, and I have a quick demonstration, about 5-10 minutes here. It's a follow-on about dynamic panels from last week, and I want to show you an alternative way to handle that. But before we dig into that, I'd like to first remind everybody, tick-tock, tick-tock, we're only a few weeks away to the Alpha DevCon 2015. I believe the pre-conference training is sold out now. It just is so popular. It is packed. I think they actually even doubled the size of the room because there were so many people who were interested in attending that they expanded it. So we're going to come away with a lot of really well-trained, very aggressive people out of this, and we really encourage people to attend the DevCon. It will really allow you to understand the new tablet-oriented interface changes that are coming up, which are a dramatic improvement in terms of your ability to create lightweight, fast, efficient, very powerful user interfaces for mobile devices, which is where the game's at. Plus, you'll also get to spend time directly with the developers, the people who know how this stuff has been put together, answer those burning questions, and introduce and make friends and make associates that are really going to help you in terms of what you want to achieve in the next year. So please go right now to the front page of the Alpha Software. There's the link there. Go to DevCon 2015. Get it set up. We're going to really have a great time. Look forward to seeing everybody who's already signed up there, and we'll be spending any time you want talking about stuff in personal one-on-one QA, so it's going to be a good time there. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do some Q&A, but before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and continue a demonstration regarding dynamic panels. So let me go over into my development environment. Before I go further, is video, audio coming through clear?
Yep,
Dave?
they're coming through.
Good. Always like to do a process. Okay, so last time we talked about it is that we had, I believe it's this one. Let me make sure. Oh, no, it's not this one. Let me open this up here. For people who are not familiar with it, this is for the new people, this is our Web Projects Control Panel. I'm in the Web Components area, and I've opened a pre-built web component. I'm going to go into Live Preview, which will show you, and this is kind of a recap from last week. So the idea is previously, when you create an interface, often people create fixed structured panels, meaning pre-designed panels. But there are certain situations where you don't know how many panels you need. So we have a methodology we showed last week in terms of using JavaScript and a little JavaScript where I can actually add dynamic panels into my system and basically on an ongoing basis create these panels so I don't have to have them pre-designed. But the one challenge of this is that it was a little bit more of an advanced methodology in regards of having to know a little JavaScript and some arcane pieces there. So I wanted to show you an alternative way you can achieve the same results but using the built-in tool set. So this always, by the way, this reminds me of, when I was in school and they go over calculus and this and that, and they go, oh, by the way, after I've taught you the really hard way to do stuff, there's a Laplacian transform which turns it into an algebraic equation. So we'll go ahead and do that, and that's what everybody uses. So sorry, last week was kind of the tough stuff, but now you're going to see how easy it is to do that from here. So I'm going to go back into my Web Projects Control Panel, and I have a new UX component, again, a UX component called Dynamic Panel Demo 2. And so I'm going to go open that up. And let me go ahead and just show you what that looks like. So I'm going to go into the working preview. So similar to what we had before, instead of entering a number here, I have two buttons here called Panel 1 and Panel 2. And so if I click on Panel 1, you'll notice that information has appeared here as Panel 1. And now if I click Panel 2, then we have a dynamic Panel 2 showing up here in this. And if I click Panel 1, I jump back and forth between the two panels. Now the cool thing about this is these panels did not exist. And in fact, let me do one thing real quick.
Notifications get you, don't they?
Yeah, I'm trying to get rid of I turned them off, and I'm not sure why that didn't show up. So I don't want, my wife's peeing in, so you don't have to see all about my kids, etc. Okay, so if you'll notice in here I have a panel navigator. And again, for people who are new, a panel navigator is kind of an invisible traffic cop that manages panels, and panels hold content. And the panel navigator is pretty cool because it will kind of move content in and out based on either if the user interacts with the panel through, say, like a swipe gesture, or you can do it programmatically. It's up to you. But you'll notice in here I don't have any panels that are created. All I have is this thing called a panel header, which lives at the top of the panel navigator. And in there I had a little piece of static text called Dynamic Panel Example and my two buttons. But you'll notice no panels here. But when I run this, you're going to know something interesting is when I click there, all of a sudden, I have some panels. And so magically, out of thin air, it's created those panels for me and loaded content into those panels. And now those panels are in the system and off to the races I can go. And I could have more buttons, as many as I wanted to, with these different items there. And the benefit of that is you don't have to create panels and load things up and do all that. It's really powerful. Really a much simpler way to approach for certain types of applications. Often many applications already have kind of a preset flow, a preset content structure where you'll have certain panels that are showing stuff, but sometimes not. And what's really cool about Alpha, which as you get into it and use it more and more, a lot of content can be dynamically generated as the application runs, so you don't have to have everything preset up front. So let me show you how this works, and it's really straightforward. Okay, so let me take a step back. I'm going to go into my Web Projects Control Panel, and I created two A5W pages. Now, these are A5W pages, but these could be full-blown UXs, meaning they could be full-on other more complicated forms or reports or anything that happens to go there. So I have a dynamic panel right here of one, and it's a very simple piece of A5W. It's just essentially think of it as an HTML page that says dynamic panel number 1. Then I have this dynamic panel number 2, and in here we have dynamic panel number 2. And again, these are just two different A5W pages, and I just chose those for this demonstration. Now I'm going to go back into my UX, and let's look at what's going on. So I've got a button here called Panel 1, and what I want to do is display that A5W page, the first page. So I click on the button, I scroll down here over to the click event, and I click on there, and you'll notice that I have a piece of Action JavaScript that says open an A5W page, static HTML URL, yada, yada, yada. In our case, an A5W page. So I'm going to double click on that, and then I'm going to open it up, and you're going to notice that first I pointed the page URL to that first dynamic panel 1. So I'm basically saying, okay, I've got this page in my system I want to show to the user, and it's called panel_dynamic_1. Now it's asking me, where do I want to show it? Now traditionally where you would show it is maybe in a specific panel, where if you had panels already set up, you would select panel here, and you would select the specific panel. But in this case, I don't have any predefined panels. So therefore, I'm using what's called a dynamic panel, and I can give it a panel name, and then I can change some other things like working messages. So that's all there is to it. So I'm basically saying when the person clicks this button, open this A5W page in a dynamic panel. And now I can go to my button Panel 2. I'm going to click on the click event. Again, we have an Action JavaScript where I'm saying open an A5W page. I double click on that. In this case, I'm clicking page URL of dynamic 2, that second page I created. And again, I'm using the same technique here where I'm saying open that in a dynamic panel, panel navigator number 1. Okay. And so therefore, when this runs, when I click on this button here, it goes into my system, grabs that page, creates a panel for me, and loads the content into that panel. And same thing when I click panel 2, it's loading that information in the panel. So thus I can have the same impact of having a fully set up panel structure, but I don't have to create all these panels ahead of time. Now, let me go ahead and see. I'm going to fly with that. I'm going to go ahead and add another one because we're not limited to A5W pages. So I'm going to click down here to Other Controls, to Button, and I'm going to go ahead and go up here, and I'm going to change that to panel 3. Okay, so I've added a new button in there, much like my other toe buttons, but it doesn't have any behavior yet. So the thing I want to do is add a behavior when the person clicks on this button. It's going to now open some new content. So I'm going to go and scroll down to my properties pane over here to the click event. And that's where when the person clicks on this button, you do that. And you'll notice we have a whole bunch of different types of JavaScript actions that occur that you can trap. You can have swipe events. The click event can also be sort of the touch event when you're on a mobile platform. So I'm going to click here. It opens up my Action JavaScript screen. You'll notice I don't have any Action JavaScript because I just created this. So I'm going to click Add New Action. And again, for people who are new, this is our Action JavaScript Builder. And what's nice about that is that Action JavaScript helps you build the behaviors into your system without having to write a ton of code. And as you can see, we have a massive amount of different items that are in here that are available. So what I want to do in this case is let's open a report. So instead of a static A5W page, I'm going to open a report. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on there. So very similar to what you saw before, it now brings up Genie. And the first thing it says is, well, what report name? So I'm going to go ahead and select a report out of my list of reports I've already created in the system. So these reports have already been generated. So I'm going to click Customers Report. Okay. And then I can go in here and define filters and arguments. There's a great video out there of the different reporting capabilities. Check it out when you get a moment. But in that case, we'll just go okay there. Next, it's saying, well, what's your initial view? I like to pick HTML. It renders faster and looks a lot sharper. And now when I come down here, I still have that target capability. So I could pick a panel if I had a pre-existing, but I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, dynamic panel. And then it's going to ask me, well, if you're going to have a dynamic panel, I need to know which navigator, because you're not limited to one navigator. You could have multiple navigators on your system at any one time. So I click on here and say, okay, I want panel navigator 1, and I'm going to call this report. Okay. And then there's a few other things. It allows you to use some other cool things like execute some JavaScript and other things if you click this. So I'm going to click OK. I've now saved that behavior. So if everything works correctly, we go into our system here. Panel number 1, remember it's opening up that A5W page. Panel number 2 is doing that there. Let's see panel number 3. Voila. You'll see it opened up my report in this, but you'll notice there was no panel, so it created a panel. And I can then now navigate right between them. And this is very similar to what, and this all came from a question from someone saying, is there a way for myself to create what's called the tabbed UI concept, which is a standard concept, but without having to create a tabbed UI, I could use only mobile panels. And this is the way you do it with what's called dynamic panels. And it works really well, and it's super fast because it's all done there on the machine. Now that you're not limited to just A5W pages and panels here. So let's go ahead and get a little crazy here. I'm going to go ahead and add another button here. Let's go ahead and call that panel 3. Okay, or actually 4. Okay, and now I'm going to go down to my click event, and I'm going to click on here. I'm going to add a new action. So this time I'm going to type UX, because notice I have here open a UX component. So this is now where I can open a whole other form within my system. So I'm going to click UX name. I have to pick one here. Let's select one here. As you can see, I've got tons of them here. You know what? I like this one. Let's do the signature capture. Let's do this signature. So I've got this signature capture demo that's in here. So I built a whole signature capture thing as a module, and I'm going to try and load that in here. And again, flying without a net, so bear with me if this thing blows up. okay, I could use a cache component, but I usually like to turn that off. And the idea behind that is that if it's opening that over and over again, it's going to be, it speeds up the process, but I want to avoid that for right now. Now, again, we have our target here, and our target is going to be dynamic panel. Again, it's asking me, well, what's my navigator? Where do I want to open it up? Panel navigator. And I can say over here, we're going to call this UX. Okay, so I'm saying when the person clicks on this button, open up my signature capture demo UX in a dynamic panel, in the panel navigator number with UX. So I click OK, save it. Okay, we'll go into work live preview. Okay, all our other ones are going to work the same, so I'll just show you that real quick. But now I click panel 4, and you'll notice that it's rendered a whole UX within this. And you'll notice I still have my other stuff available. I can go in here, show my report, go back here, etc. And this is a fully operational UX that's operating in here. So I can walk through the different records. I can create a new record. There you go. Kind of looks like my brain at the end of the first week of school. So click accept, submit that. You notice this is a full-blown operation here. And all of these are live and active, and I'm able to do all those pieces there. There's my famous one right there. Look at that. Picasso would be proud of me in this demonstration here. So as you can see, this dynamic panel, what's great about Alpha also, and I kind of say that, so bear with me, but you can break your application down into subcomponents and then bring them together. So in case you noticed here, I had a report that I built, I had a whole UX that I built, and I was able to bring them together inside this user interface using dynamic panels. They could have been fixed panels. It could be a tabbed UI. And so I can reuse these over and over again. So the one thing I like to caution people on that is that when you're in the mobile disconnected world, it's a little bit different. There's certain limitations on it, although they're fixing those issues right now. And in fact, in the new release, if you use these embedded like for instance, when I'm clicking this panel and loading it into a dynamic panel there, I'm not sure how well that would work in a disconnected mobile app. I'd have to double check on that. So this is more for your websites and pieces there. But the cool thing about this is that you don't have to pre-create everything. You can kind of create them into little entities and objects that do certain things and then bring them together with, in this case, dynamic panels or whatever happens to be. So that kind of brings our closure to how would you implement a tabbed UI kind of concept using the more modern UXs, panels, panel navigators, panel layouts. And as you can see, it's all built into the system. We're using the most powerful aspect, which is Action JavaScript, where you're just selecting an entity, an item, and saying open it into a dynamic panel, and then setting some parameters there. And that's all there happens to be. And it works really well. And I hope that explains a little bit more, gives some hints to people who are interested to do that. And I hope for people who this is kind of new for you, that it opens up some new ideas in terms of, you know, what you can do with your interfaces and your systems with that.
Okay, so we do have a few questions, but I would like to see I'd like to see a lot more. Please, by all means, please type them in now. Now is your chance to go to the GoToWebinar control panel to the questions section. Type in your questions, but let's start.
We know those alpha people who get alpha are go-getters, so let's go get some questions.
Get some questions, exactly. So the question is, when is it best to use a dynamic panel over, say, a static panel, or what would you do? What's sort of the overall benefit? I understand one of them, which is you're used to building tabbed UI components. You want to replicate that functionality. I get that, but is there anything else you can think of?
Well, I mean, just time saving. If you'll notice that traditionally if I were to create this, I would have to create I would go in here, I would say, okay, I'm going to create panel card number 1, panel card number 2, and then panel card number 3. And then I'd have to go in here and then use the embedded concept where I would embed an object, and this could be either a report or a component. So instead of having to pre-lay out my item and create panel cards for all those ones, I don't have to. Dynamic panels allow me to do that. The real benefit is you notice that I was able to enhance the functionality of this app by just adding some new buttons.
Yeah.
I didn't have to add in new panel cards. I didn't have to then add navigation buttons and everything else. So bottom line is time saver. You know, you can just really, that's it. It's small. You don't have a lot of preloaded panels and other stuff like that, preloaded embedded objects. And here's the other part too. And this is a little bit more sophisticated. Right now I'm using this open this, but now what I could do is we've added this action JavaScript directly to the click events of each of the buttons, but there's no reason why I couldn't go up here to my menu, and this is maybe new for some people, and go to JavaScript Actions Editor, add my actions in here at the UX level, and then I could have multiple buttons triggering that opening in Dynamics. So I can actually create sort of those open these items at the form level, at the top level, and then the buttons just say, hey, run this little piece of JavaScript. And since it's JavaScript, you could actually create dynamic user interfaces where instead of these buttons being fixed right here, I could literally put in, say, a list control, have a list control read from a database a set of functions, things I want to do. When they click on the list control, I could then fire a piece of action JavaScript to open whatever they want to open up there. So you can start creating dynamic, data-driven user interfaces. Again, a little more sophisticated than what I've shown you here, but all of that is available because you have the ability to create dynamic panels instead of having fixed panels and fixed structures. You always kind of, the problem with fixed, the good thing about fixed is that it's fixed and it doesn't change. The bad thing about fixed is every time you want to rev your application, you have to modify that fixed structure to add more infrastructure to do it, whereas with dynamic, you don't have to go through all those steps. So time saving and creating more sophisticated applications over time.
So just a quick follow-up question from a person here. It says, so with dynamic panels, the panels will only load if the button is clicked. So do all the components and pages load when the panel navigator is loaded, or is it just sort of created when you click that button?
That's an excellent question, and whoever asked that, I love that. Okay, so as I told you, one option is to do this, is when I click on, if I click a panel here, and I create a panel card, and then in that panel card I go down here to embedded object, and let's just pick a component here. Okay, now notice how I now have all these extra stuff there. So I have to kind of set all these controls and other things there. I can click this delay render till visible, which speeds things up, but the reality is that it's going to kind of preload these pieces here. So the nice thing about a dynamic panel is that when I click this button, it makes a callback to the server, grabs that content, brings it back to the user interface, and loads it up. So there's a downside of that. That first time it comes back, there's a little lag time when you do that. But then, therefore, you're not loading up all your panels at one time. You're only loading up the ones, essentially, your dynamic panels, that you need when the user wants them. So therefore, this thing is going to load really fast. Like for when I go full preview, all it's doing is rendering this top portion here. And then notice when I click panel number 4, there's this working message because it's calling back to the service and loading it there. So it's kind of a trade-off. I could preload this if I wanted to, if I had static panels. But if I want to have more dynamic and just say, okay, but then once it's loaded, now you'll notice that it's all local to the person, so it moves very, very quickly. So that's a great question. And that's part of the issue. If you're using mobile disconnected, you don't have the ability to call back to load up this panel. So this really doesn't work very well with a mobile disconnected because you're making those callbacks to the server to say load that content into that dynamic panel.
Great.
Mobile is more of a fixed structure. You want to have everything embedded and fixed in it because then it gets encapsulated and put into the app that goes out to the mobile device.
That's great, and that actually was one of the questions of, what's the downside to the dynamic panel? And the downside is it doesn't work. It shouldn't be used for an offline mobile application environment. So that's
not really.
That's the limitation. Yep.
You have to assume you're connected in order for it to work.
Excellent. Good. We have a bunch of good questions coming in. Let me just getting.
They woke up.
It's great. This is a basic question, which is how does Alpha Anywhere interact with the keyboard on the phone? For example, if you're editing a memo field, how does that work?
Good question. Good question. Okay, so when you are creating a Alpha component, I'm going to go ahead and create a component here, and I'm going to create a UX. Okay, And I have, remember I have, let me go ahead and just use one of these here. Where is that? So now I'm going to create a little mobile app. It's already preset, so I can go in here and do a live preview. And you'll notice I have my panel card right here, and then I have my buttons that move between them. So in this panel card there, let's go ahead and go to this top panel card. I'm going to get rid of my static text here, and I'm going to go ahead and add in a text area as you said. Okay. Now, it's going to be a little hard to see here, but I can say working preview. And then I have a text area. Now, I'm just typing it in. I clicked in there. Now, in the situation, and let me go ahead and re-show you how that works. When I go into live preview, let's do a live preview so it's a little easier to see. I've got this text area, but you'll notice it's not been selected. When the user taps on the text area content, like this actual box right here, then it's going to pop up a keyboard because it's saying, oh, this is a data entry element for HTML that needs it. Now, that's just going to pop up the standard keyboard when you start typing the data in there. And you can then start typing data like you do on any mobile app in terms of that situation. So let me go back here and adjust two things. I want to turn off so it shows there, so we'll go there. But if we go back in to this text area and I select the item here, then I'm going to go over to the properties area here. You're going to notice here that there's a section called text area properties, okay? And you'll notice that I have some different selections here. And so you can go into those different selections and change like how the thing works. So you have a lot of capability that's involved in this. But let's go ahead and add a text box and show you what looks like in here. So I'm going to add a text box. And I go into my text box here. I can change the width and the height. So if I wanted to be really large, I could do that. But also I wanted to show you down here in the text box properties, there's something that says HTML5 type. Okay, so you'll notice that there's like a default keyboard, and the mobile device, whether it's iOS or Android, will default to your default keyboard when it goes there. But sometimes you want some control. Maybe it's a numeric data field, or maybe it is a textual one or something along those lines. So with the HTML5 type, we can tell it what is the kind of data that this text box will hold. Whether it might be a email address. So therefore, if it knows it's an email address, it's going to show the keyboard that has the .com and the @ sign on it. Or if it's a number, it's going to show the numeric numbers pre-defaulted. Or if I'm just doing a URL, it will show that. So you have control over the keyboard, what keyboard is triggered by this text box by using this HTML5 type. And then you can also enable and disable autocorrect and auto-capitalize, which is really powerful, for instance, if it is a password field or if it is a username field. You want to get rid of autocorrect because you don't want the person typing in their username and then it auto-corrects it to something else. That could be very annoying. Same thing with auto-capitalize. You may want to turn that off for those elements there. But if you're doing a text field to enter in some data, you may want to have both of those items there so it's easier and faster for the user to input the information in there. And if they're using a third-party keyboard, I don't know the exact interaction, but it will leverage that because it just says, hey, show the keyboard and off to the races. And they all kind of work the same way from that standpoint. So the keyboard is automatically triggered when the field gets focus. And then you can control the type and nature of the keyboard to a certain degree and the autocorrect, auto-capitalize by adjusting your text box properties here. And it's a bit of trial and error, so what you want to do is set up a couple forums, and then what you can do is use the remote test capability where you just say, okay, do a full preview here, and then you can display a QR code that you can zap with your phone and then literally work against your development machine on the mobile device and see how it interacts with those text boxes to kind of refine it down to the experience that you want your user to have when they're filling out those forms. Now, I hope that answered your question, but I want to let you know a big but. And that big but is the following, is that the new clipboard methodology and capability that's really going to be showcased at the Developers Convention changes our conference, changes everything about this. This is kind of this current state of the union, current state of the world here. But what's going to be super cool is you're going to see when you see the new technology that's being released, you're going to have complete and total control over how the person interacts and enters data in it, to the level where you can create your own user, you can create your own custom keyboard to show the user that maybe only shows special characters or something like that. So there's a lot of that coming down the road. So I want to kind of let you know that's how you interact and manipulate now. But man, what's coming down the road is a whole new paradigm that will allow you to have complete control and will speed up user interface or user input by the user. It'll make it more intuitive. It will add whole new classes of you where you can literally draw on pictures. I mean, it's just crazy. It's going to be so much fun. And that's really going to be at this developers conference. That's why I'm encouraging people to attend. But I hope that answers your question right now. Go ahead and use the following techniques there. But no, coming down the road is some really cool stuff.
In fact, some of that stuff is available to you today in the pre-release version if you have an up-to-date subscription. And
if you're brave.
If you're brave. And in fact, don't use it for production, but it is good to play around with again, to get a hold of it. Anyway, a video was just made about building your own custom keyboards by Dan Bricklin, our CTO, and I put a link to where you can find that video in the chat window if anyone is interested in that.
I'll go see it. It's really cool.
It's pretty cool.
It is so neat.
Let's see what we've got here. Here's a person who asks, what about security? How does that fit into your tabbed panel idea, or how does that work within a mobile application?
Point. Mm-hmm. Okay, good question. First, let's go ahead and open my control again. I'm going back to my web projects control. I'm going to go open that up there. First, these buttons that I have here are full security enabled. So let me scroll down here. So for people who are kind of new, it's a really good question. We appreciate that. Is that Alpha ships with a built-in security framework, which has the ability to add users, add groups, and then with those groups you can set policies at the component level, at the page level, at the login level, but then also, what much more importantly, down to the control level. So I can actually literally click on a control in one of these, go to my security groups here. Yeah, I don't have security enabled on this, but if I were to click on this button right here, it would say, okay, what groups can access this button? And if a person is not a part of that group, they won't even see that button. So therefore, they cannot even open and launch whatever it happens to be. So for instance, in panel 3, we have a report. Maybe that report is for management only. So the situation would be you would go into that panel button, this button that triggers that, go to security groups, and enable that button only to be available to the specific individuals who are part of that group. So you'd select the managers group, and therefore it would show and hide there. So in this case, you would use the security group capability on the button or whatever launches the UX report page in the dynamic panel. And that's the best way to handle that. And therefore, you can enforce security policy even though you don't have a panel or an embedded object to set the security on those individual items.
Excellent. Here's sort of, again, another UX or user experience question, which is this person has a UX panel that's used to complete forms, and he can't scroll from form to form unless he clicks outside of a field, because he needs to sort of drag the screen up.
Yes.
So the problem is that it's hard to get your finger between those fields. What's the solution to that? Yeah.
Go watch Dan Bricklin's video.
Actually, that's covered exactly in that video that I sent. So
yeah, and we don't mean to be flippant. That is very good, and
it's exactly the problem that everyone is running into. So that's we have addressed that. And one way we've addressed that is by, instead of making you scroll to get to the next field, we have forward and next buttons right on the keyboard, which will take you to the next field, to the next field, to the next field, to the previous field. So it jumps to the right position on the screen, because because you just don't feel that using your finger to manipulate the keyboard or manipulate the form underneath is a very efficient way to enter data. It's very frustrating, basically. Yeah.
The interesting aspect is this is not unique to Alpha. It's a problem with HTML running on mobile devices, and they, the issue was really a great example of this, and we hear this all the time, is I've got a question with a text box, and then I click in the text box, and all of a sudden the keyboard covers everything, so I don't see the question anymore. So all of a sudden it's like I can't even understand what the question was anymore. I have to get out of the keyboard, look at what the question is, go back in, and so it's just very awkward and cumbersome. And that's across any application that's been out there so far. So what really the team at Alpha looked at is, hey, how can we solve this core issue to give you control of how do you present questions and then how do you answer those questions, or data and representation, give you the flexibility to create your own way to answer that by clicking on a set of pictures, entering numbers, whatever it be, but give you the developer control so you can optimize it for the best user experience. And that's what's really exciting about this, is the fact that we're going to be creating user experiences that normally would require dedicated graphic people and dedicated source code level kind of development by native tools, meaning that you could, if you had a native toolkit like Xcode, you could always go in and create your own little things, because you have essentially complete carte blanche on there. But the problem is you have to learn that, and that's really heavy, and it's a lot of code, etc. So what Alpha has done is taken the problem, which is I want to create easy to use, dynamic, excellent user experience user interfaces, but I don't want to have to become a native coder to pull that off, and that's where it is, and that's what's coming there. Now, the other cool benefit of this, and this is very important, and I know that it's touched on before, is performance. If you look at each of these buttons here, each one of these gets rendered into a set of each HTML and JavaScript, etc., that then gets downloaded on the app. So essentially, it's kind of heavyweight from the standpoint of, if I've got 100 questions, the traditional method is I would have 100 text box entries or whatever they happen to be, and then I have to render 100 HTML elements, which take up space, which costs more time and energy. With the new technology, what you basically do is you render 100 placeholders, which are very lightweight, and then you have that one editor that you need for each of those individual, or multiple editors. So therefore, the other cool thing you're going to see with this new technology is going to be a dramatically reduced amount of size of your application, and your application is going to run incredibly faster because it doesn't have all this kind of baggage that goes along with doing it in the traditional method. And so that's a twofer. By implementing the new capability, you get better user interfaces, but the cool thing is they're going to operate faster, lighter, and better than before because of the way they're at. And you're going to have tons and tons of flexibility to create your own user experiences for your clients and work with third-party really good HTML, CSS designers to help you create that. So it's very cool. But back to your question there, is that it's really the problem with like that form entry is why the new stuff was developed, because there's only so much control we currently have over the native keyboard. Now we're going to give you much more control in terms of where the thing is shown, etc. You can create your own keyboard. There's lots of, specialized keyboards, specialized user inputs. It's really cool. And so if you watch those pre-videos that Dave just sent out, I'll give you an idea of it. And then, again, over the next few months, we'll be digging into it much, much more deeper and showing you more and more how you can do it for yourself.
Great. Okay, so here's a good plain old grid question. Actually, it has to do with grids and reports. And here it is. It says I want to pass an array to a report, and I'll explain why this is.
Sure.
And I want to pass a search term basically to the report. So basically, I want to filter the report. Now, if it was something as simple like, oh, I only want to show records from customer 123, we know how to pass a value. That's fine. But what if what if it's checkboxes and you want to pass an array to the report? Okay, they checked R, they didn't check U, but they checked D. R, U, and D standing for different attributes or criteria. How would you pass something like that to as arguments?
Okay, I'm going to make life simpler.
Wait, can you just Google that during the presentation? Isn't that, we should do them all that way.
I know.
Oh, there's
I should do
a
it.
whole array argument, so here we go.
I know. Let's see. There you go. That should answer your question. Basically,
Great.
someone understood the issue is that often you have what are called a SQL in clause. What a SQL in clause is that, let's say you have 100 items in your let's say there's 100 different potential answers, and you want answers 2, 6, 12, and 52. Well, you can create a SQL has a clause where you can say select star from table X where customer ID in, and then you can say feed it a list of 2, 4, 8, 9, 12, etc. So this is kind of the underlying SQL call, and you use this in clause. I hope you guys can see it's a little small on there, so I apologize. But the idea behind it is that you're sending in essentially a sequence of different items, a non-sequential level of items. So that video I showed you right there will show you how you can select items either through a list control or a checkbox, and then pass this as an array into this this query that's associated with your report. And it works really well. And if you watch that video, it literally steps you through there. And it's really powerful because now you can use, say, checkboxes up on the screen to check off the items you want in your report. And then what it does is the user interface will grab the value of those checkboxes, put it into an array, and pass that array to the report as an argument. And then that argument will be used in this in clause right here to run the report. And I literally did this last week with someone, and it works really well once you kind of get the feel for it. Now, the most important part, and this is really, really critical, when you watch this video, it gets to a certain point, and it talks about the naming convention for the argument. So what you're doing is you're passing an argument. Usually you're passing in like ID, which is the ID of like the user you want to run the, like city name, something like that. So just pay attention when you watch this. When you pass in a, when you create the argument for this information, you have to use the name, it has to start, I believe, with array city codes or array client codes, because when Alpha looks at this, it says, oh, it's an array. I'm going to treat it and understand it's an array of a value instead of a specific single value. So that's the only thing I caution is watch the video. It'll show you how to do that. And then what's really important is just double check to make sure you name your argument correctly, because Alpha expects those kind of array arguments to be named a certain way. And when they do, then it can handle them properly and it works. And I've just had problems in the past where I forget to name it with the array name in there, and all of a sudden it's not running. And I'm going, what's going on here? And then I go change the argument name, and then you're off to the races. So that video right there should, using the in clause with the report filler, and it's called an array argument, and just double check and make sure that you know exactly that you name the array argument properly when you put it together.
Excellent. Couple of quick questions. One is, if you're emulating a tabbed user interface, like you showed us an example of, is there a way to make the buttons of the list have sort of a more of a button-like feel like we have in the tabbed user interface, so it's clear which thing you've clicked on?
Okay, yeah. The way I would approach that is right now we've specifically set a button for each of these items. But I could do the following, and I could go into JavaScript Action Editor. I could create a new action. So normally, just for the people who are newer, when you have an item in your user interface, you can then associate directly in there the action JavaScript. So I can go in here and create my action JavaScript. But often you want a more flexible manner. So what you can do, instead of associating with specific control, I can go to Menu, JavaScript Actions Editor, click that. I'm going to create an action. I'm going to say Show Report. Okay. And now I can build that action using the Action JavaScript Builder. And I'm going to open my report. This is almost identical to what you saw before, but I'm doing it at the top level there. So I'll just say customer report, click OK. Let's do it as HTML. Let's go down here and set it's going to be a dynamic panel. Going to be panel navigator 1, and I'll go report 1. Okay. So you'll notice here now I have a new action JavaScript which is not associated with any specific button, meaning it kind of lives at the UX level, the form level. And if I ever want to trigger that, I can go ahead and click this, and this is the little piece of JavaScript, dialog.object.runActionShowReport. So now I can copy that JavaScript, and anywhere in my interface I can run that JavaScript and it will perform that report activity. So I'll give you an example is, let's say I want to have a image in here, and I want that image here to be, we'll go ahead and grab an image. I'm going to just use a built-in image, and Alpha has a bunch of built-in images. So I'm going to insert the little alpha there. And then in my click event for this image right here, I'm going to go to text mode and paste in that run this action. So you notice I didn't actually use, let me go ahead and change this. I didn't go through here and build that portion. All I did is after I built it once, I can go into text mode, click here, and now when the person clicks on this button, it's going to run my action called show report. And I'm coming to your thing there. So let me go ahead and go into live preview. Okay. So now I've got my buttons, but now I have a little image. This might be hard to see. When I click on that image, it performs the same thing. And basically what it's doing is saying, oh, okay, run this action that you created on the UX. Now, these buttons right here are similar buttons. So what you could do, which is kind of cool, is you could put in the following. You could put in a checkbox here. And I'm going to call this button list example. And let me make sure I do this correctly. In the last release, they added some really cool stuff here. So what we can do is, here we go. So I've got my checkbox right here. So I can go to choices here, and I can say item A, item B, item C, item D. Okay, so now I've got those. Now if I go in there and look at what this looks like by doing this, you'll see that it's rendered it as a standard set of checkboxes. Not pretty, but you'll notice I have my checkboxes there. But what I can do, which is cool, is if I click on that checkbox and I go over here, and you'll notice there's a new thing under checkbox properties that says render as button list. And then I click OK. Okay, now I go in here. Let's go ahead and show you what this looks like now. Now I have a set of things that, notice it looks like a button list here. But notice when I click on them, they're checkboxing them. And so it's rendering it a little bit, looks like a button, but it actually behaves like a checkbox. And now what we can do is we can go into that choices here, and you'll notice when I clicked render as button list, there's the on select and on click event. And so now I can say on click, I can paste my my action JavaScript, but more importantly, I can say, and this will be not correct, if button list example is equal to report, then run this action, else, etc. So I can put in a little piece of JavaScript right here that looks at the value of that, and you could actually map the value. So there's some tricky parts there. But the idea is you can use this button list there to render sort of a set of vertical buttons, and then when the person clicks on it, instead of hard coding all of the actions like I did on these buttons up here, you can actually use this on-click event, run a little piece of JavaScript, look at which checkbox item it's selected, and then based on that, show the report. And I believe, I wonder actually, that won't work, but because I don't have it there, but I wonder if radio button, that's because that's a single click kind of scenario. You can also do radio buttons as button lists also, which is cool too. So there's a lot of flexibility there. So explore using maybe a checkbox list as a button list and those click events there. The other is that if you'll notice, and this may be if you really want a tabbed UI look and feel and you want to kind of use the standard here, you could actually do this. Okay, so let's show you real quick what it looks like right now. So you'll notice I have everything on the header right here. but I can go ahead and do this. I'm going to take this panel navigator right here, and let's see if I can get this to work properly. I'm going to go to panel. I'm going to create a panel layout, okay? And then I'm going to have I'm going to add a panel here, and I'm going to panel card here, after here, okay. Okay, so let's put in here, I'm going to go in here, kind of going by the seat of my pants, so bear with me here. Menu, okay. Now I'm going to take all of these out of the panel header, or there, and I'm just going to go in here, and I'm going to take care of there. Now one thing I'm doing is what the difference between a panel layout, and actually I'll be doing a presentation on this at the Developers Conference. A panel navigator, only one panel card is shown at one time. With a panel layout, it's going to show my panel card and my panel navigator. So this is more of like laying it out on the screen into a grid structure. So in this case, it's saying it's left to right. So this panel card is going to be on the left side, and then the panel navigator is going to be on the right side. In my panel card number 1, I can go down here and say I want this to be about 15%. So I'm clicking the layout side right here. And now let's see if this works. I might have totally screwed it up, but we'll go ahead and give it a run. So you'll notice over here I have panel card there. Boom. So now I have what would be considered more of what would look like a tab layout. And in fact, why don't we go ahead and just take these and put, check, there you go. Let's go ahead in here. And now, starting to look a little bit more like that. Okay. But I'm notice I'm missing the header, so I can go in here. I can go to this panel layout right here. I can say panel header, turn that on, put in a static text. I'm going a little fast because we're running out of time. Here is my super app that did not blow up during the webinar. Okay, so now I go into live preview, full preview here. Starting to look like there. I can put in, actually if I wanted to get crazy on this thing, do I really want to try that? I could create a panel layout where literally I would have up top here, I would have a panel here, and then I would have my 2 panels under there, and so this panel could display a UX form or whatever it is. So as you can see, I'm starting to make it look like a tabbed UI, and I'm using all the modern technology. And I'll tell you one other thing that's really powerful. The tabbed UI is incredibly powerful, but it's a very heavyweight component. I mean, it's got so much functionality in there that it's crazy. So this will actually produce a faster loading interface because it's really just a set of panel layouts and some panel cards, and everything's dynamic. So it's actually going to run much faster. Like if I go ahead and run this in Google Chrome, let's go ahead and do a preview here in Chrome. Let's see what happens here. Okay. You can see that once it's got to render it the first time, but you notice how fast that thing came up. So if I restart it, you'll see that it literally renders in about a half a second. And it's doing these dynamic callbacks, but pretty fast. And you'll see the little working there. And then once it's on, and again, very lightweight, there's not as much running in the browser, so you get better performance. So that's kind of how I would create a tabbed UI. And again, the major thing I would do is I would create a panel. I would insert this panel layout inside of another panel layout, which would have which would have the panel card up top for that top level, and then the rest of this down below. So you can see the nesting goes into it from there.
Excellent. We have a request for you to show that same thing, but in the mobile emulator, just to see what that would look like.
Oh, sure. Okay. Okay, this is not going to be really meant for
Or a tablet sort of thing, horizontal, yeah. For a phone, you'd have some real estate issues, I think.
Yeah, but cool. What's cool is check this out. Watch. Notice how the panel cards all adjusted for you.
Yeah.
It made this the width of that. It actually extended this down to the bottom here and made this so it's using as much reading. And you'll notice also it kind of, since I limited to this 15%, it kind of took the text and kind of crammed it in there. So it does a lot of the responsive stuff for you. So if I'm on a different size screen, let's say I'm on even an iPhone 6, you might be able to pull this off. kind of tight, but I think an iPhone 6 horizontal would actually work okay. You could actually pull it off on an iPhone 6 Plus horizontal. And again, this all works there with scrolling. You'll notice it's scrolling these pieces there, etc. You'll notice that I can kind of, since these are dynamic panels, I can go back and forth. If you want to, you can go into this panel navigator right here, and you'll notice it says carousel. If you change it to programmatic, then it will ignore any swipe gestures, which may be important. So now, when I actually live preview this thing, let's go there, open a couple of these things here. I can move this around, but you'll notice it's not bringing the other panel card there. You have to actually click on a button to go to this other panel card. It doesn't swipe between them. So you have control over the behaviors there. And the reason that's kind of moving back and forth, and this is the last thing I'll say about that, is that in the panel navigator, each of these panels that dynamically load up, you can, it allows you to move within the panel. We'll talk about that at a future webinar there. But that kind of shows you how it works in a mobile device.
All right, I've got two quick questions that I think we can answer in the next 2 minutes, and then I've got two longer questions, but we'll get to those next session. So let's start with the quick ones. The one was, if you have, for example, your app displayed on an iPhone, next to the space bar there's a little microphone button that does speech to text. Will that work with your Alpha Anywhere application?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that was easy. And the second question is, yeah, let me grab it here real quick. Oh, when you're using PhoneGap, how much of the application is preloaded onto the phone or the tablet?
All of it.
Okay.
Well, let me take that back.
But, okay.
Essentially all of it. All the constructs of the controls, the panels, all that kind of pieces are preloaded. The only thing that's not going to be preloaded is any data that you retrieve and bring down. So for instance, let's say you had a list control on your mobile PhoneGap app that listed all the companies that are available. But you have in there a filter that says only load the companies that say this representative or the salesperson is responsible for. So what you'll see is that initially when you log in, it's going to make a query and pull down that data. So that data is not in the app yet. It's dynamically pulled down to the app by the list control, given control that you have. So the data elements, you kind of separate the app structure from the data, and that stuff is coming down from there. Now, that said, if you have static data that you always want available, there's techniques you can use with the PhoneGap where you can include that static data as JSON files that get associated with the app. So those are already down there. So let's say you had this sales tax lookup, which was not dynamic, where you had a pre-made set of data that you want to refer to, like the sales tax per zip code. Well, there's a tons of zip codes out there, so you may not want to have to pull that down every time. So what you can do is create a JSON file that has that data in it, and then include that in your PhoneGap app, and therefore then you can refer to that data locally, and it's already been essentially preloaded when the person installed the app on the device.
Great, excellent. So for next time we will get together. We had two longer questions. One had to do with how to choose images from a drop-down box with actually seeing the images, and the other had to do with integrating security into the application that you had just built, but we can tackle those for next session.
Sure.
If you have any other questions, though, in the meantime, please send an email to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, @alphasoftware.com. I want to thank everyone who participated today, logged in, asked questions, and I want to thank Dion for presenting. You guys make this session interesting and stimulating. I know it's one of the highlights of my week is to host this, and I believe Dion feels the same. So anyway, hope you have a great week. We'll see you next time on Wednesday. We hope to see you at other future webinars. Take care, and goodbye.